even in the last few years and few months of the Nazi regime, the people there, the ideologues, were so devoted to exterminating the Jews that basically they diverted resources from the war effort to get more Jews into concentration camps to um, um, basically believing in the that sort of cause so much that they just needed to finish that. And not to draw too many ominous parallels, but in the last few days, hopefully last few days, weeks, or months of UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini says that despite the sanctions of Israel, despite the allegations of Hamas ties, despite the funding shortages because of those allegations, he still believes he is on the right side of history. And I think there are some parallels between those two things. So today we'll be talking a little bit more about Philip Lazzarini, the chief of UNRWA, as well as some of the things that came out in recent days, and also the hostage Eli Sharabi, the for those who remember, he was released. He was, I think, one of the last ones who were released. He was one of the really malnourished hostages, so he lost like I think like 30 kilos of body weight or so. And now he first I think he met with Donald Trump at some point a few weeks ago, and also now he spoke at the UN Security Council. So we'll contrast some of the things Philip Lazzarini says and some of the things Eli Sharabi says. Joining me today is Michael Kaufman. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And yeah, Michael, what do you make? Philip Lazzarini still believes he is on the right side of history. He also said that it's stressful. No one could really be prepared for something like this.
Yeah, look, one of the things you learn in public relations school is you never admit mistake. This is what politicians are taught all of the time. You always change the narrative or change the story or blame somebody else or claim that you didn't have all the information or just don't take any responsibility and pretend. And unfortunately, since the general public doesn't actually expect any responsibility from their elected leaders or their not elected leaders, as in the case of UNRWA and UN, you usually get away with it as long as the local political echelon, which are your colleagues, are happy with you. So the playbook for the UNRWA is going to be, we're sticking to our guns. We are the only relief agency possible in Gaza. They're all starving to death, and it's all Israel's fault. And if we don't do our job and we don't stay here and keep doing it, everyone's going to die in Gaza. And you know, any idiot now. I mean, there are so many pieces of data that are very clear about UNRWA's role in all of this. Not even talking about UNRWA's role in schooling young Gazans on how to kill, and that the main thing to do in life is hate and kill Jews and kill Israelis. But the actual what they did during October 7th and from then on is so enormously egregious that it's absurd. Now, it's great that Ellie went in front of the Security Council. This, of course, was at the behest of the United States. You will notice, please, that there were no requests such as this under the Biden regime, even with any of the hostages that came out before. This is one of the first things that Donald Trump did, was to actually meet these people in his office, which was, of course, a show. But it's an important show because it says that the leader of the free world has time to work with to meet these people who spent over 490, I think, days in captivity and so on. And UNRWA is going to continue in the face of all the data to tell you that they did right and they're good. And I'm not the least bit surprised.
We have a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much, and a super chat from Bronx Guy Can Hill RD, thank you so much. Um, Yeah, I mean, sort of continuing to talk about some of the things Philip Lazzarini has said. He also said that October 7 basically destroyed the last protection dikes that UNRWA might have had. Uh, and that the arsenal was unleashed to try to discredit the agency, attack the agency, get rid of the agency. And yeah, it's what you said about sort of not accepting yeah, responsibility. I mean, come on, like we know about the stuff that has been going on with UNRWA. Well, later we can talk about even the sort of the education stuff. Um, but yeah, we know that UNRWA employees, in some cases, have been Hamas members. Hamas has, in some cases, sort of had used UNRWA vehicles. This is stuff that has been happening, and there is no sort of self-reflection about, hey, maybe maybe we are a bit too sort of connected to a terrorist organization. Not to mention that even if UNRWA had the best intentions to actually sort of be separate, the fact is, if you are the sort of Hamas is the government in Gaza. If any organization, any NGO want to be in Gaza, they need to have connections with Hamas. There is no way to sort of like avoid or not see each other. There will be connections. They are necessary. And when it comes to UNRWA, when it comes to UN, they have no desire to even try to do something better. I mean, something he also said is this decision threatens the life and survival of civilians in Gaza. And yeah, he also said that the situation in West Bank is also problematic or deeply troubling. And something to also remember is that UNRWA is helping the Hamas war effort by any sort of humanitarian aid, or the so-called humanitarian aid rather, is helping Hamas. If there was humanitarian aid going into Japan or the Nazi Germany during World War II, the war would have been going on for years instead of trying to finish, off as soon as possible to, well, first of all, to protect the nations that were attacked, but also to even when it comes to the death on the other side, prolonged war. I mean, this conflict could have been ended when it started in 48, if that it was done properly back then, or I think it was relatively properly done. But like the decades following afterward, this could have been over already, and the people dying today wouldn't have to die. But it keeps going on because of organizations like the UN and like UNRWA. Yeah, I mean, Michael, what do you make, yeah, of this idea that UNRWA just cares about the civilians in Gaza and needs to be there to protect them?
Well, when anybody says to you that there are ongoing civilian deaths in Gaza and blames anybody except Hamas, you need to stop them and say the war ends tomorrow and the civilian deaths ends tomorrow if Hamas leaves. Now, what's beautiful and despicable about the arguments that are used on the other side is everyone on the other side agrees that Hamas would never surrender. That's like not in the cards. And the notion that that could even be conceivable is throw it out. Just throw it out. And let's focus instead on blaming Israel or blaming whomever for all of this. So and this statement, and Marco Rubio has said it so beautifully, and others, and this is called moral clarity, folks. It's not even moral clarity. This is the history of almost all warfare. Every single civilian death in Gaza is due to Hamas. It started before October 7th, of course, 2023. It started before that with the missiles that Hamas used to send into Israel, and more came today, by the way. Thank you very much, Hamas. But it really began on October 7th with the current war. And remember what Sinwar and his henchmen did when they got to speak to the world's public, the idiots in the world, led by, at the time, a bunch of feckless, incompetent Western leaders, was to say, we're going to keep doing this. And the more of our people that die, the more martyrs that we have, the better. We like that. We want our civilians to be martyrs because it forwards our cause. It forwards our cause. And the world it would be great if the people with ability to think in the world listened carefully to that and think about how heinous and evil that is, that they actually wanted and they continue to want to kill. Now, remember, a lot of the Hamas leaders are living in Qatar and other places who are directing this current war effort. The gloves are off from Israel. Thankfully, Donald Trump has allowed Israel to fight the war. Netanyahu is still, in my opinion, putting a fair amount of constraint for reasons that are absolutely beyond me. But we have a better chief of staff now in Israel, and we have a very angry group of people in Israel that want to actually finish this thing. And their goal is to finish Hamas. And frankly, folks that are listening, if every civilian in Gaza has to die for Hamas to be eradicated, so be it. We need to be very clear about that. That is the only right answer here, is for Hamas to be eradicated. And if it means that Gaza, which will probably be leveled, physically will be leveled, but if every living person there has to be killed in order for Hamas to give up, then the fault is Hamas. Full stop. Hamas could have given back some hostages recently. Never mind since October 7th. The destruction you see is on one group, Hamas. One other point, this isn't an isolated event with UNRWA. UNIFIL in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, is exactly the same thing. They were in bed with Hezbollah, and they actively colluded with Hezbollah. What's even more ironic about that situation, of course, is there are UN resolutions that say, the UN's own resolutions say what they did was illegal and against the UN and its funding and everything. And yet they still did it. And nobody has really taken the UN to task about that, other than Trump cutting off a fair amount of funding in general, certainly for UNRWA. And I don't know what the status of UNIFIL funding is at the UN. But this is not a difficult, this is so morally clear who is right and who is wrong that it's laughable if it weren't so sad about the way this has been conflated.
Well, just quickly about the UNIFIL, because it's been a while since we talked about it, and I'm not sure if ever there was like a straight up collusion. Although the sort of the way this was done, it might as well, like, it's almost impossible to do it this way without collusion. Like we've seen, basically, like UNIFIL post is like overseeing like Hezbollah's sort of forces.
Well, yeah, but my point is exactly my point. And I think that the key point there, Daniel, is that UNIFIL's the UN resolutions regarding UNIFIL and Hezbollah were that that Hezbollah was not allowed per the UN below the Litani, south of the Litani River, right? And UNIFIL was fully aware that Hezbollah was in fact operating. Forget about whether they were colluding, but the fact that UNIFIL was violating its own UN resolution, which said you can't have Hezbollah south of the Litani River. So at least we know that UNIFIL was against its own UN resolution, allowing and not reporting and not announcing that Hezbollah was south of the Litani River, which of course everybody knew, including wink, wink, nod, nod, UNIFIL.
Now, someone earlier mentioned that if this happened during World War II, citizens would sort of revolt, meaning, us giving aid to the enemy. But the fact is, the corruption was already started during World War II. The fact that we helped the Soviet Union. Again, World War II was in part started by the Soviet Union. Poland wasn't invaded alone. It was invaded by Nazi Germany, Slovakia, and the Soviet Union. And I'm not proud about, basically starting World War II. But those were the nations that did actually invade Poland, that started World War II. Now, allies, because Soviet Union was later invaded, were like, okay, they are basically on our side. But no, they weren't. They were an authoritarian nation that have also engaged basically in the, not to mention, even years earlier, they took over the Baltics, they took over parts of Romania, they took over Finland. They were aggressive when it comes to that. Yet we sort of helped them because, that's when the sort of first I think compromising sort of started when it comes to politics and geopolitics, and we are paying for it still until now. Now, someone is saying that, engaging in Gaza is collective punishment. That is pretty much, I don't know if to call it a stolen concept, but that's silly. The fact that when a war is started, it is started by a certain nation, and the nation that is defending needs to take all actions that are necessary to end it. I've said this about Japan. Japan was starving at the end of World War II. The citizens were like actually on the brink of starvation. Now they decided they would rather surrender than actually go on and starve completely. But if they started starving, that's their choice. They said we'd rather go down with the ship than sort of surrender. And yeah, I mean, people should read Atlas Shrugged. I don't want to spoil it too much, but at the end there is a scene where one character uh, shows a gun at someone and says, "You either shoot me or you move aside." And he didn't want to make any choice. There's a sort of different point being made, but basically, and then she shot him. But yeah, you have to remember that, like, if you do not do, if Palestinians do not do anything about Hamas, then they'll suffer the consequences of it. They have the decision to do something. In many cases, Israel is controlling the area. They have the choice to do something better, to do something different, to do something about Hamas, to do something about their ideology. They are either continuing to help Hamas or yeah, not doing anything. And if that happens, they are suffering the consequences of it. Hamas is suffering the consequences of it. Um, and yeah, I want to bring in sort of what is it Eli or Eli Sharabi?
I think it probably depends, honestly. There's pronunciations differ across North America to Israel. So until I saw, I don't know, I suspect it's Eli because I think it probably is Lamed and then Yud, but honestly, I'd have to see the Hebrew. Not that I'm an expert, but
Ah, sure.
I'd have to see the
Uh,
Hebrew.
all right, let's go with yours. Ali, so he talked to the UN Council, and he talked about, Hamas ate like kings while hostages starved. Again, quoting him, I know you discuss the humanitarian situation in Gaza very often, but let me tell you, as an eyewitness, I saw what happened to the aid. Hamas stole it. I saw Hamas terrorists carrying boxes with the UN and UNRWA emblems on them into the tunnels, dozens and dozens of boxes paid for by your government. They would eat many deals a day from UN aid in front of us, and we never received any of it. And those are sort of just his sort of own personal statements. But we've seen the same thing. We've seen Hamas taking the aid. We've seen that when sort of some Hamas operations are disrupted, that's when the prices in Gaza markets fall, when Hamas is actually not be able to sort of take the aid. So this is all, in a sense, he's not bringing anything new. We knew about this. What is unique is sort of that he sort of saw it for himself. And I do like the fact that this is sort of going into the UN and not on Israel, because at the end he said also that all hostages must be brought back. And yeah, that should be said to the UN. UN should do something about Hamas, should figure it out. It shouldn't be on Israel to negotiate with Hamas or to surrender to Hamas to end release terrorists, to bring the hostages back. If the UN wants to do any peacekeeping, then they need to figure out something about terrorist organizations, not the countries that are trying to respect even international law, which Israel does try to respect in many cases, unfortunately. But Michael, what do you make of Eli going to the UN Security Council and sort of speaking directly?
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. We knew everything he said we knew, and has been pieced together and reported from from himself and from a lot of the other hostages that came out. I mean, he was one of three who really looked horrendously bad. I mean, the poor guys really looked they came out of Auschwitz or another one of the concentration camps, and he lost 30 kilograms. Remember, folks, that's 66 pounds. That's at least a third of his weight, which is frankly dangerous. I mean, the fact that he was alive, that is generally the cutoff for severe malnutrition and time to hospitalize someone. And he no doubt had a fairly long recovery. And you by the way, you can't just feed these folks because their bodies are so debilitated that if you give them food, you can actually kill them. So you have to go very slowly. It's tough for them because they're super hungry, but you can't overfeed them and you can't give them nutrition too much by mouth by drinking either. So it's a very tough recovery for these folks, and it takes a week or two before they start to get their digestive system back to working again to the point where you don't have them in danger. I think the most important thing about this was Donald Trump and the current administration in America putting us up in front of the UN in their face and telling everybody that you are on notice, that you people are colluding with terrorists. We all knew that. We've all said it. And here's one of the living proof of that. It's a lot like when the concentration camp victims were liberated from the concentration camps, and there were plenty of Holocaust deniers even back then. They came out and they told their stories. And these stories are critically important. But this was absolutely a choreographed and a wonderful thing that finally we have someone who's an actual victim, a good person who's a victim, whose entire family has been slaughtered and whose brother was killed in captivity by these animals, these good for nothing animals, Hamas, who came out in front of the UN and said, you have done nothing for this in favor of the Israeli hostages since the beginning. And the same is true, of course, for the Red Cross and the International Criminal Court and all the other completely corrupt worldwide so-called great institutions that we all thought so highly of in the past. And now we're very clear about their ilk and their philosophical bend. This was a very important thing. And I think it's actually a prelude to enormous pressure that will be put on the UN from the Americans. And frankly, to shame also the Europeans who have been, even worse than Biden was in terms of supporting Israel and the whole thing. I mean, Biden was ambivalent at best, but the Europeans have generally been completely anti-Israel. And I think it's terrific that it's happening. Or we can all live in a world where Hamas is important and Iran is important. I mean, that is the other side of all this. We have a choice. We can go with a guy like Eli or Ellie, or we can decide that we want to put up with the terrorists because they have done such an amazing thing for human flourishing in our history.
Yeah, and even when it comes to sort of the reasoning why this was done, I mean, if there is some sort of like pressure on the UN, I almost do not care. I mean, better than nothing, but there is no sort of like reforming the UN unless you kick out Russia, China, and about three-quarters of the UN. Then it's still a pointless organization. Like in a way, it cannot exist like it is right now. If we want the sort of UN-like thing, let's add something to NATO or let's add something on top of EU, which I think even that would be problematic. But there is nothing you can get out of the UN itself alone. Again, you cannot have like Russia and China having like the deciding votes at the UN Security Council. That pretty much
Not.
means that the only way to do like the UN Security Council is really the only thing that has sort of even some sort of power, and even that requires for it to be something that China and Russia agrees with, which pretty much means it has to be like an insane amount of like terrorism, such as like I think like some parts of Yemen were sort of like targeted by the UN Security Council. That was because everybody could agree like that was too much, or maybe like going after ISIS in some instances when it's like, well, really nobody can sort of like find an interest. But in most cases, especially when it comes to nations like Israel, where Iran are big allies of both China and Russia, that there never will be something reasonable that will be done. That's why fundamentally a complete withdrawal from the UN is the only thing that sort of the bare minimum that really needs to happen when it comes to the UN. But let's hope for the best. Just to finish off with something Lazzarini said, he said that basically maybe if UNRWA is gone, maybe other organizations could handle the humanitarian aid, but nobody can provide the government-like services such as education and healthcare. People, we don't have much time to finish that. People can go in some of the past episodes when we talked about UNRWA. But yeah, tremendous thing they are doing with the education and healthcare in Gaza.
Here's a thought. Maybe the Gazans could figure out how to govern themselves. or actually elect leaders that know how to govern or think they know how to govern and try to actually govern. That's a thought. It's kind of give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. Maybe it's time the Gazans started to learn how to do it themselves. But I think hopefully they're gonna have to move because like UNRWA, I think it's pretty clear that Gaza will be leveled because Hamas is not going to give up. The hostages, in my opinion, are not going to come back anytime soon. And the good news is Israel has realized that you don't negotiate with terrorists.
And when it comes to sort of what will happen with Gaza more, we will be continuing to talk about this on the reality show. So make sure to join us there just in a few minutes or so. With that, thank you, Michael, for joining me today. Thank you,
Pleasure
everybody,
always.
for watching, and bye bye.
Great. Cheers.